Hello students, I am here today in the TV studios of AIOU to lecture you on the last unit of your course, Educational Psychology. Our topic for today is psychological testing, and therefore we will be looking in details at different sorts of psychological tests, their characteristics and limitations. Let's begin our lecture by first trying to understand what exactly a psychological test is. Suppose that you are a psychologist. A new client walks into your office reporting trouble, concentrating, fatigue, feelings of guilt, loss of interest in hobbies, and loss of appetite. You automatically think that your client may be describing symptoms of depression. However, you note that there are several other disorders that also have similar symptoms. For example, your client could be describing post-traumatic stress disorder, insomnia, or list of other psychological disorders. There are also some physical conditions such as diabetes or congestive heart failure, which could result in the mental symptoms that your client is reporting. So, how do you determine which diagnosis, if any? You give your client one tool that can help you in a psychological test or psychological assessments. These are instruments used to measure how much of a specific psychological construct an individual has. Psychological tests are used to assess many areas, including traits such as introversion and extroversion, certain conditions such as depression and anxiety, intelligence, aptitude and achievement, such as verbal intelligence and reading achievement. Attitudes and feelings such as how individuals feel about the treatment that they received from their therapist. Interests such as the careers and activities that a person is interested in. Specific abilities, knowledge or skill such as cognitive ability, memory and problem-solving skills. It is important to note that not everyone can administer a psychological test. Each test has its own requirements that a qualified professional must meet in order for a person to purchase and administer the test to someone else. Psychological tests provide a way to formally and accurately measure different factors that can contribute to people's problem. Before a psychological test is administered, the individual being tested is usually interviewed. In addition, it is common for more than one psychological test to be administered in certain settings. Moving further, we shall now look at the different types of psychological tests. Psychological tests are formalized measures of mental functioning. Most are objective and quantifiable. However, certain projective tests may involve some level of subjective interpretation. Also known as inventories, measurement, questionnaires, and scales. Psychological tests are administered in a variety of settings, including preschools, primary and secondary schools, colleges and universities, hospitals, outpatient healthcare settings, and social agencies. They come in a variety of formats, including written, verbal, and computer administered. Let's look at few types and examples of psychological tests. Intelligence tests are used to measure a person's overall level of intellectual functioning. In his book, Psychological Testing, psychiatrist Robert Gregory states that despite the varying definitions of intelligence, experts tend to agree that it includes the capacity to learn from experiences and adapt to one's surroundings. The Stanford-Binet Intelligence Scale is a popular intelligence test. It can be administered from age 2 through late adulthood and assesses reasoning, visual, spatial processing, knowledge, and working memory. Other commonly used intelligence tests include the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children 3 and the Cognitive Assessment System. What are personality tests? Personality traits are self-reported inventories that are used to assess personal traits and behaviors. The most widely used personality inventory is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. The MMPI-2 consists of 5, 6, 7 true or false questions and takes over an hour to complete. It touches on a variety of topics such as health concerns, relationship problems, substance abuse, self-esteem, anxiety, depression, manic symptoms, delusions, and hallucinations. The MMPI-2 RF is a shorter version with 338 questions. The Myers-Briggs type indicator is another common test used to categorize people into personality types based on 4 realms of psychological functioning. Let's talk about achievement and ability tests. Achievement and ability tests are designed to measure the level of child's intellectual functioning and cognitive ability. Most achievements and ability tests are standardized, meaning that norms were established during the design phase of the test by administering the test to a larger representative sample of the test population. Achievement and ability tests follow a uniform testing protocol or procedure. For example, test instruction, test conditions, and scoring procedure, and their score can be interpreted in relations to established norms. Common achievement and ability tests include the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children and Stanford-Binet Intelligence Scales. What are projective tests? Projective testing is rooted in psychoanalytic theory. It is based on the belief that one's wants, needs, motivations, and instincts are unconscious construct. In order to reveal one's innermost thoughts, individuals are shown ambiguous stimuli and asked to explain what they see. For example, the ambiguous stimuli used in the Rorschach test are 10 symmetrical ink balls. The thematic apperception test is another commonly used projective test. What is construed from these tests is prone to subjectivity. Therefore, interpretations typically vary among examiners. What is neuropsychological tests? Children and adolescents who have experienced a traumatic brain injury, brain damage, or other organic neurological problems are administered neuropsychological tests to assess their level of functioning and identify areas of mental impairment. A neuropsychological test may also be used to evaluate the progress of a patient who has undergone treatment or rehabilitation for a neurological injury or illness. In addition, certain neuropsychological measures may be used to screen children for developmental delays or learning disabilities. Let's talk about interpreting the score. Psychological tests, like many measurements of human characteristics, can be interpreted in non-referenced or criterion-referenced manner. Norms are statistical representation of a population. A norm reference score interpretation compares an individual's results on the test with the statistical representation of the population. In practice, rather than testing a population, a representative sample or group is tested. This provides a group norms or set of norms. One representation of norm is the bell curve. Norms are available for standardized psychological tests, allowing for an understanding of how an individual scores compares with the group norms. Norms reference scores are typically reported on the standard score scale or a rescaling of it. A criterion referenced interpretation of a test score compares an individual performance to some criterion other than performance of other individuals. For example, the generic school testing typically provides a score in reference to a subject domain. A student might score 80% on a geography test. Criterion reference score interpretations are generally more applicable to achievement tests rather than psychological tests. Now we shall look at the characteristics that are essential to carry out a valid psychological test. The diversity of psychological tests is staggering. Thousands of different psychological tests are available commercially in the market, and doubtlessly hundreds of others are published in other parts of the world. These tests range from personality inventories to self-scored IQ tests, from scholastic examination to perceptual tests. Yet despite this diversity, several features are common to all psychological tests and are taken together serve to define the term test. A psychological test is a measurement instrument that has 5 defining characteristics: objectivity, reliability, validity, norms, and practicability. Let's look at each of them. Let's talk about objectivity. The test should be free from subjective judgment regarding the ability, skill, knowledge, trait, or potentiality to be measured and evaluated. Second is reliability. This refers to the extent to which the obtained results are consistent or reliable. When the test is administered on the same sample for more than once with a reasonable gap of time, a reliable test will yield same scores. It means that the test is trustworthy. There are many methods of testing reliability of a test. Now let's talk about validity. It refers to the extent to which a test measures what it intends to measure. For example, when an intelligence test is developed to assess the level of intelligence of someone, it should only assess the intelligence of the person, not other factors. Validity explains us whether the test fulfills the objective of its development, there are many methods to assess validity of a test. Now let's talk about norms. Norms refer to the average performance of a representative sample on a given test. It gives a picture of average standard of a particular sample in a particular aspect. Norms are the standard scores developed by the person who develops a test. The future user of the test can compare their scores with the norms to know the level of their sample. Let's talk about practicability. The test must be practicable in terms of the time required for completion, the length, number of items or questions, scoring, etc. The test should not be too lengthy and difficult to answer. Lastly, we will now be looking at a few of the limitations of psychological tests. Psychological testing can provide valuable insights into people's behavior and mental abilities. Data from psychological testing is used to make decisions in both academic and workplace settings. Because psychological test gathers information about people's behavior and abilities, they are critical for a decision-making process that is more sensitive to the specific needs of the individuals than any decision based solely on human judgment. However, it is important to note the limitations of psychological tests so that results are not used inappropriately. Let's talk about varying interpretation and uses. While psychological tests are potentially valuable resources, they are merely tools and do not directly lead to any actions. Any decisions made as a result of the test scores become the responsibility of administering psychologists or others who assess the information. Two psychologists may interpret the results differently and take different course of action. Thus, Oxford University urges the psychologists to use other form of data to corroborate decisions made using psychological test scores. For example, anecdotal notes about a student's current level of performance in the classroom should be used alongside psychological test results to make any decisions that will affect the student. What is uncertainty of measurements? Because psychological tests are attempting to measure things that are not directly observable. There is always going to be a gap between what a test is attempting to measure and what it really measures. Developers of many widely used psychological tests have worked hard to make them as valid as possible. But the nature of the test often rely on indirect measures, such as an individual responding to hypothetical situations. Decisions made in testing situation are not always the same actions people would take when faced with the situation in reality. Even after extensive testing, there may be areas of uncertainty that test results do not reveal. Let's talk about changing circumstances. As time goes on, because of changes in psychological theories and advancement in technology, psychological tests only remain relevant for a time. Social and cultural changes can lead to test items becoming obsolete, or new psychological theories may replace the founding theories of the test. To remain valid and reliable, psychological tests must be updated often. For example, in the past, when more people attended church, test developers expected test makers to be familiar with the Bible. As church attendance began to decline, using test questions related to the Bible no longer made sense. What are cultural bias? Because all widely used psychological test instruments are standardized in English, test results are often not accurate for people who speak another language. Even when tests are translated into native languages, problems occur with the words they have multiple meanings and idioms specific to one language or culture. Once translated, the tests are no longer truly standardized. Psychological tests often use the dominant middle-class culture as the standard. This limits their validity for children from a different economic or cultural background who may not have the same experiences or language that the test assumes as standard. It is nearly impossible to create test questions that account for the different experiences of individuals. So psychologists remained test administrators to use results with caution.
Today, Mr. Rutherford, I would like to conduct a Rorschach test to help us get to the bottom of your condition. You are familiar with a Rorschach test?
No, I've never heard of it.
Well, it is a series of cards with ink blot-like images on them. I want you to examine each card as I hold it up and tell me exactly what is your first impression of that image.
Okay.
Yeah.
That there is a naked man and woman making love in Central Park. Yeah.
So, is this one?
Yeah, that's a naked man and woman making love in a boat. Yeah.
And this one?
See, now that's a naked man and woman making love on the back of a camel.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Rutherford. Well, I think you have a serious preoccupation with sex.
Hello, Doc. You're the one with the dirty pictures. Jeez.
Students, that was all for today. We looked in details at the concept of psychological test, some of its many types and the limitations, and characteristics of a good psychological test. Dear students, I hope you enjoyed today's lecture and also the whole series of lectures on your course Educational Psychology. Now it's time to say goodbye to all of you from the TV studio of AIOU.